Welcome to the Daily Apple. I'm your host, Kevin White. My occasional co-host, Emma Ryan, and I will dive into all topics related to the science of longevity, along with some other subjects we just find of interest, with the hopes to provide useful information for everyone. This stems from my personal interest to optimize the human condition. To not just live longer, but to live better. Hey, it's Dr. Kevin White, and welcome back to the Daily Apple. Today's episode is part 2 of the conversation we started last week with Dr. Matt Kaberlein and Dr. Nicki Byrne. If you missed that one, we talked about the 4 pillars of health span: eat, move, sleep, and connect, and how to actually apply them in real life. But in this follow-up, we go way deeper. This is a full deep dive into blood work, biomarkers, and the kind of lab testing we use every day with patients who care about staying strong, sharp, and independent as they age. We cover everything from ApoB, C-peptide, and fasting insulin to hormone health, genetic risk, environmental toxins, and how to actually interpret all this data in context. It's not fluff, and it's definitely not biohacking hype. This is real longevity medicine, grounded in science and shaped by the questions we hear in clinic every day. So if you've ever looked at your labs and wondered, what does any of this actually mean? Then this one's for you. Let's get into it.
All right. So I want to talk about blood work because I know this comes up a lot on the podcast, and we have never really sat down, I don't think, on an episode and gone through the different blood biomarkers that we look at in our programs. And so I thought that might be a good thing to do. And then you guys can sort of just give us your perspective on why are we measuring that? What does it mean? And I suspect you will mostly agree, but if there are points where you have little different perspectives, that will be interesting too. So this is maybe not in the order that I would have put it in. So let's start with ApoB. Why do we measure ApoB?
It's like the backbone of all the bad cholesterol, and it gives you an actual amount of how much you have. And so it's not just the LDL or the weight of its LDL and VLDL. And studies are showing it's more highly correlated with cardiovascular disease. So we want to know what it is.
Yeah. And is it both of your perspectives that lower is better, period? Full stop. We want to get that number as low as we can. Not saying that everybody has to be 0, but is that the idea?
Yeah, I like it personally around 80 or below. 80 is what I like to shoot for.
But I wouldn't say lower is. I have no data to support this, but I can't imagine down at 5 is actually a healthy number for somebody.
Yeah, that shows that you probably don't have much cholesterol, which you need for all
hormone
things,
production and everything else. So I don't think lower is better.
Okay.
There's probably an end. I just don't know what it is.
But yeah, shoot for around, 60 to 80. Gives you an idea of the activity of the LDL. My eyes immediately dart to ApoB and Lp(a) before even looking at the other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also worth saying, we're just getting started, but none of these biomarkers, I shouldn't say none of them, most of them in and of themselves just give you a clue, right? But it's really the whole picture that you want to get. And with ApoB in particular, and really all of the lipids, we had an episode recently that you and I did on CCTA plus Clearly, right? We actually measure the plaque burden, right? So to some extent, if my ApoB was high, but my plaque burden was 0, that would be less concerning than if my ApoB was low and I had a lot of stenosis, right? So you want those other pieces of information to really know what's going on.
I was talking to, I don't know if I told you this, but speaking to a cardiologist down in Dallas at their podcast, I asked him the same question. And he said he would see people that, he knew had high visceral adiposity. He knew their lipids were terrible and all this. And he did the CTA Clearly test, and they would have, minimal disease and vice versa.
Not meaning that they're healthy necessarily, just means that they're not going to have a heart attack, right?
Right. It's just one. It's just one point, but and that's a rarity, Of course, usually it correlates, but anyway.
Okay. C-peptide.
That correlates with insulin. This is an odd direction that we're doing it.
Like I said, it was ChatGPT generated in categories and then alphabetized, I think.
I feel like we should have a buzzer whenever the question comes up.
I just wasn't ready.
I love how Nicki looks at me like I'm stupid. Like,
I was like,
why are you asking that?
I was imagining we're going to LDL or Lp(a).
This document was prepared by Nick Arapis, if we need to blame anybody on why it's in this order.
Yeah, so C-peptide it's released with insulin. And so sometimes we start seeing that C-peptide go up before we start seeing insulin go up, and it can be an early sign of insulin resistance. So we like to see that number under 2.5.
And so again, this is fitting into the picture of, in this case, metabolic dysfunction,
yes.
Insulin resistance. Yeah, okay. C-reactive protein, cardiac.
Ooh, it's giving us an idea of, generalized inflammation in the body. And then the cardiac one is specific to risk of cardiovascular disease.
And hemoglobin A1C, I'll look at you because this is an easy one.
I like for this to be, this is just one point of the picture. If you're going to be healthy and you want to live a long time, you want to be insulin sensitive.
Yes.
So we can all agree on that. So part of that picture, it's a C-peptide, but the fasting insulin and the hemoglobin A1C and the fasting glucose, all these things. So the hemoglobin A1C, as we know, gives you an idea over the past 3 months of what your blood sugar's been. It doesn't tell you highs and lows and all that stuff.
Right. Just kind of an average value.
So I like that to be snuggling up to 5.
Yeah. And I know you've told me mine is too high and we need to get it down. So we're working on it.
Yeah.
Insulin, we sort of already talked about, but maybe just.
Yeah, fasting insulin. One of the things that we definitely, general practitioners are not checking enough. We'll see a fasting insulin start rising before we're going to see the hemoglobin A1C rising. Because it takes your body more insulin to keep that blood sugar, your fasting down at 100 or 99 or whatever it is. And so we usually see that fasting insulin go up before we see the hemoglobin A1C go up. And so it gives us a really good opportunity and a window to capitalize on that and get the person to correct course before we start having all the downstream effects of too much insulin.
And when you measure fasting insulin, you're always also going to measure fasting glucose.
Yes.
So it's the combination of those two things, right? And then you can use that to calculate HOMA-IR, which is a prediction of insulin sensitivity, so to speak. So,
but if you're seeing someone who's got a fasting glucose of 95, which is normal, but their fasting insulin is 20, it's taking that person a lot more insulin to keep that blood sugar in the normal range.
Yeah, and this is interesting to me because, again, I don't have data. I wish I had data from when I was younger and presumably, my metabolic system was functioning as optimal as it ever did. But, certainly over the last 5+ years, since I've really started, paying attention, my fasting glucose is always it's higher than it should be. It's usually between 100 and 105, 106. But I have a very pronounced dawn effect where, it'll be, in the 90s or lower at night, and then it'll come up right when I get up before I eat anything. And my A1C is maybe not optimal, but it's not bad. I'm not pre-diabetic based on A1C. And so the question is, are there certain people whose, for lack of a better saying it, motors just run a little hot, your baseline glucose value is just a little higher. My insulin has always been pretty low, my fasting insulin. So from an insulin sensitivity perspective, it looks good. But if you only did the fasting glucose, you'd be like, oh, that person's close to pre-diabetic. So do you think it is the case that there are just some people whose set points for baseline glucose is higher? And that could be bad. Like there could be pathology that goes along with that, but it's not necessarily an insulin resistant state. It's a chronic high glucose state.
I would assume there's people who live in all realms of all of this, but yes, I would 100%. I would think that there are some people whose bodies function well with their fasting glucose at 100 and they're pumping out the right amount of insulin. When they eat food, it's going up, it's coming down quickly, and it's doing all the things that it needs to do.
But another thing about that is you worry about acute glycosylated end products, right? That cause proteins to not work correctly.
Right. Advanced glycosylation end products, yeah. And again, yes, that's why I said there may actually be pathologies associated with chronic higher glucose load. Ages are another area where it is intuitive that those are not great to have high levels of. And yet I have not seen convincing data that ages in and of themselves within, a fairly broad range are damaging and detrimental. So certainly if you get way outside the range there. So I don't know how important it is, I guess.
The nice thing about, like you said, fasting insulin, everyone really should get that done because I've seen people, and you've seen them in the hospital that, maybe 6 months ago or a year ago, they had a little high fasting glucose, let's say, and they were just told, hey, watch your diet and nothing else. And then they come in, their blood sugar's like 360 and they're peeing 5 times a night. They're well on their way to demise, right? So the cool thing is if you get that done, you can course correct and save yourself a lot of future cost, time, money, all that stuff.
And again, I mean, Nicki, you would know better than me, but my impression is among the clients that we have, that's probably the most common thing people come in with, not realizing that they have metabolic dysfunction, pre-diabetes, sometimes diabetes, but undiagnosed.
Yes. And especially with the group that we have, most of them do not have pre-diabetes. And so they were told, oh, your hemoglobin A1C is 5.5, you're okay. And then we're getting this fasting glucose of 20.
Yeah.
And we're saying, well,
fasting insulin
insulin of 20.
Yeah.
And we're saying, well, you might not be okay. Like we might really need to work on some strategies to bring this down.
And these fasting glucose based definitions are, obviously imperfect. They don't work well. They work well if you only want to measure one thing, or A1C based, if you only want to measure one thing across the population. But at the individual level, they really don't give you the resolution you need to know what's going on. So most people should have fasting insulin measured. I mean, that's probably not the only thing on the list of things that we measure that most people don't get measured, but that's got to be one of the most important.
I would say it's probably the most important.
Great. So I'm not going to go into all the different lipids that we measure, but we have lipid panel with cholesterol, HDL ratio, and NMR lipo profile. So maybe you can just give us kind of big picture what we're looking for there.
Yeah. So we're looking at LDL, both the particle number and the actual cholesterol count.
The NMR part is right, where
the NMR
you get the particle number and size.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so again, you're looking at size 2. So the smaller the LDL particles, the more likely it is to get stuck in the endothelial wall and cause problems. We're looking at the HDL, which is obviously the good cholesterol that helps remove it. We get triglycerides with that. And one of the other cool things we get is I think it's NMIR score, where it actually looks at the lipids under nuclear magnetic resonance, and it tells us what's the risk that this person has insulin resistance.
Right. So another way to assess insulin resistance. And again, if you start to see all the different insulin resistant metrics lining up, that gives you a pretty clear picture of what's going on. Okay, cool. And then, I guess the one other thing to say on this is the vast majority of people, if you just go to your typical primary care, all you're going to get probably is total LDL, total HDL, cholesterol, triglycerides.
Yeah. And the LDL is a calculated number on that.
Ah, okay.
So it's not even an actual measure.
Right. Okay. Omega check. And I'm interested to see if you both agree on omega-3s. So omega check measures EPA, DPA, and DHA. I'm looking at the piece of paper, so I know that. What are we looking for there?
We just want to make sure that people are having enough of the fatty acids and the healthy fat that they need. So when we see that number below, we're recommending people increase their intake of fish. We are recommending that they start a fish oil tablet.
Any preferences on? Well, first of all, I'd be interested to know, do you have a target range for?
6.
Omega
index.
At least 6 for omega index, which is EPA plus DHA, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of confusion around this because the Omega check, the LabCorp and Quest do different tests, first of all, and the number they give you is not usually the Omega index the way it's defined in the scientific literature. So people should just be aware of that. But you're looking for an Omega index of 6. And then same idea, if you're below that, eat more fish
And I've only had one patient that's been 6 or above without supplementation. I don't know about you. And he loves wild-caught salmon about 3 times a week.
Great.
Yeah, that's one guy.
Yeah. And then in terms of omega-3 supplement, any recommendations there?
A lot of times we talk about adding all the things like flaxseed and hemp hearts and all of that to your food. There's a lot of the ways that we talk about it. You can sprinkle it into yogurt, on salads, mix it into baking.
Right, because most people will think fish oil, but those are also sources of omega-3s, right?
And they have a lot of fiber in them.
Right.
Yeah. Sardines. You don't like sardines?
No, our health coach brings up sardines, and we've only had one patient respond positively to that suggestion.
Maybe they're just not getting the right kinds of sardines. Okay, so I guess one thing to say on this, and this is an area that is evolving, but starting to do more research. Which actually, this comes from a podcast. The person who watches the podcast providing me with information. I'm really starting to think that the ratio of EPA to DHA in the supplements matters as well, and that having a higher EPA ratio is where you want to be. So just worth thinking about and putting out there if you're looking for a supplement. Sedimentation rate, Westergren.
Oh, that's an ESR. So that's a general number that tells us what someone's inflammation is doing.
Inflammatory marker.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Lipoprotein A, LP(a). This came up earlier. I think you mentioned it, Kevin.
Yeah, it's an arthrogenic little guy. I had a guy.
If Nick had done his job right, this would have been up with ApoB, right?
It would have been.
Yeah, ApoB and LP(a). I look at both those things. It's hard to get down. We check it on everybody. It's just good to know. There's a new drug coming out that, have you heard of this? Injectable.
Yeah.
So that'll be exciting.
I don't think it's approved yet, though, right?
No, I don't think so. But yeah, it can be difficult to get down. But yeah, it really is a risk factor. I had a patient once that came to me. I had a new patient, 62, had like 12 stents in him. And he's like, my lipids are fine. And his LP(a) was through the roof. And I was like, here's your problem, buddy.
But what do you do, though? Because, again, there's this perception that LP(a) is less responsive, or some people even say non-responsive to lifestyle. Is that true, first of all? And then what do you do with somebody like that?
We've seen it go down with the patient we've discussed before. We have seen it go down. But frankly, you can't get it down low. You can't get it down to, 40 or 30 just by... I haven't had success with that by lifestyle alone. I don't know if you have.
We've definitely seen it vary, which is surprising because the thought was, as you said, that you can't move it. There's also PCSK9 inhibitors are supposed to be able to bring it down about 20-30%. I will say we just prescribed it to a patient whose LP(a) was about 250 and it did not budge.
Really?
Yes, not even in the slightest bit. So that was disappointing.
Wow.
Niacin also is supposed to be able to bring it down, but those side effects are pretty nasty to get up to the highest dose of niacin that you'd need to bring down the LP(a). So I haven't been using that.
Yeah. TPE is supposed to...
Therapeutic plasma exchange. Interesting. Yeah. It makes sense. Yeah, you got to keep doing it. But yeah. So actually, we still have to do the deep dive into my blood work after the therapeutic plasma exchange. But teaser, it seemed like my lipids went down, right? Yeah.
They did.
Okay, that's good. So yeah, that's interesting. You're right. That makes perfect sense. And maybe that's a way for people who have very, very high non-responsive LP(a) to bring it down. Okay, let's see. CBC with differential/platelet.
That's just looking at the complete blood count. So the white blood cells that fight infection, the red blood cells that bring oxygen around, and the platelets that form blood clots.
And that's a standard thing almost anybody's going to get for their annual blood draw. But important. Hepatic function panel. So we could talk about the specific markers if that's useful, but
in this space, my eyes will kind of go to the ALT, looking at fatty liver, consistent with insulin resistance and all that. So some people will be surprised. ALT, I like that around 20 if I can get it there. That's one of the things that, but it's a large panel. It's kind of standard like a CBC. So, but there's a lot of information you can get from it. But
it gives you clues on liver function.
Yeah, and we do point of care ultrasound at OptiSpan too. So it's nice if someone they come in and they say, I know I have these high, and we put the ultrasound on and you can see that they have fatty liver. They can actually see the number, they can see the fatty liver, and it really makes a big impact.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I learned recently that you should probably not get a blood draw immediately after hiking Mount Si. My ALT and AST were through the roof.
Yeah.
And I saw that. I was like, oh my God, my liver's failing. And then Nikki's like, no, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Big deal.
Yeah. And they were down, I think, a week later or whenever when I got it retested. So, that is actually probably worth saying that a lot of times it's not unique to those markers necessarily, but there are blood-based biomarkers that severe stress, severe exercise, fasting, all sorts of things that you can do will have big effects, transient effects on these biomarkers. Okay, renal panel, kind of the same thing. What are we looking at there?
Kidney function.
Anything to say beyond that? Which she looks at me like I'm stupid. Like, why are you asking me these questions? Yeah. It's on the sheet.
We're looking at kidney function. One of the things that we're seeing a lot at OptiSpan, though, is that when we look at the EGFR, it's a calculation that takes someone's creatinine, their age, their sex, and it spits out a number. And for patients who are eating a lot of protein or who have a lot of muscle mass, the EGFR isn't as accurate. And so we're starting to do cystatin C in a lot of patients.
Yeah. Okay, that's really useful information. That's also... It's not the next on the list, but it's close.
Okay,
so we'd be happy to know. So can you just take us through that? So let me repeat what you said and make sure that I get it right. So people who have high muscle mass and or are eating a lot of protein, their EGFR, which is a calculated estimate of kidney function, it's estimated glomerular filtration rate. Yes. I would have got there without you telling me the answer too.
I'll let you flounder next time.
Okay, perfect. It can be lower than is real in those people. So they can appear as if kidney function is lower than it actually is.
Yes, because what we're looking at is we're looking at the creatinine. And so if you're eating a lot of protein or you have a lot of muscle, you're going to have more creatinine. So even if your kidneys are doing what they're supposed to do and they're filtering out enough of it, you might still have more than would be predicted for your age or sex.
That's where the cystatin C comes in handy. That's a real good marker, early identifier of renal issues.
Ferritin.
Iron stores.
Or inflammation.
Yes.
So if you have a ferritin that's below 30, almost 100% that is iron deficiency. But if you have a ferritin that's 400, 500, 600, it tells you nothing about iron stores because you probably have a lot of inflammation going on.
So low ferritin, iron deficiency, very, very high ferritin, probably high inflammation.
Yes.
And then that would lead you to go look and try to figure out where that high inflammation is coming from.
B vitamin, we look for nutritional deficiencies. It's important when you're looking at homocysteine and methylation, it's used there. But it's very uncommon to see that low with a standard American diet.
But B12, which we also measure, that's a different biomarker, that you do often see low.
I see it kind of in the lower range of normal, and I like to see it a little bit higher. You see it?
Yeah, we see it in the 300s all the time.
I like
we
to
like
see it
up
800,
500.
you know.
Oh, you're higher than I am.
Yeah, 5, 6, 7, whatever. I like it higher than 300, though.
Yes.
And am I remembering correctly, B12 is one of those that if you take a B12 vitamin, you'll see it increase rapidly. Like it's not like vitamin D where it takes months to get to saturation.
This is water.
Yeah, right. So just be aware of that. What you're measuring if you're taking a B12 supplement may depend on when did you most recently take the supplement. Okay, iron and total binding capacity.
That kind of goes along with ferritin on how much iron you have. You know, when we're looking at women as they're going through perimenopause, a lot of women can have a lot of heavy irregular bleeding. So knowing if they're feeling fatigued and they have brain fog, it might not be perimenopause. It might just be iron deficiency. And we want to treat that. And then another thing that we can see that has devastating consequences is hemochromatosis.
Yeah.
So if someone has too much iron, that iron gets deposited in the liver and in the brain. And we want to catch that as early as possible.
And that's even more of a problem in men, right?
Because men aren't menstruating, they're not using blood. And the body, when your red blood cells break down, it reuses that iron. And so for men is obviously more significant.
Yeah. And again, correct me if I'm misremembering, but so hemochromatosis is genetic, right? And the frequency of people who have 2 alleles for hemochromatosis is pretty rare, but the carriers is double digits, I think, in the population or close. And that can lead to subtle symptoms. Like magnesium. So this is one we hear about a lot in the longevity world. What do you think?
I mean, we check magnesium often in our patients. It's a little bit rare to see it off the chart low, but again, that might just be where the range is. We still do recommend magnesium a lot for patients. It helps with sleep, it helps with mood regulation, it helps with bowel regularity.
Is the magnesium recommendations usually based on the blood test or based on other pieces of information?
Usually based on other pieces of information.
Yeah, and magnesium also water soluble, so if you're taking a supplement, you're gonna see the change right away. Okay, we're gonna go back to the iron here. I know it's not in exactly the right order. Transferrin.
It's just part of the iron panel. That in and of itself, I don't think is all that meaningful.
We talked about vitamin B12. Vitamin D. Okay, this for whatever reason seems to be a controversial topic in some circles. Where do you guys land on vitamin D?
Why is it controversial?
I don't know. Well, you were at the Live Long thing where the guy was saying that nobody should ever supplement vitamin D, which is wrong, by the way.
Yeah, I see people low on this. Do you see people
in
low
Seattle, almost everyone comes in low on it if they're not taking supplemental vitamin D.
What is the range that you shoot for? Because this is where I think there is room for reasonable variation or disagreement on what's optimal for vitamin D. Where do you guys land?
I think north of 40, 60, in that range.
Yeah, we usually shoot for about 50 to 80.
Yeah.
So overlapping, but not identical. But you would say below 40, definitely supplement.
Absolutely. I shoot for 60 if I was going to pick a number.
Yeah. Okay.
5,000 IUs a day with K is what, anywhere from 5 to 10 because it's cheap.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, hormones are next, but let's save that for last because I want to spend a little bit of time on hormones. So we'll come back to hormones. So there's a few that are sort of listed under specialty, inflammatory, and autoimmune. Let's just talk about, so we do a bunch of autoimmune testing that is non-standard. I don't know that we need to go through every single test. Some of them are assays developed for specific autoimmune disorders. I think one of the reasons why we were doing that for everyone was a question we had, which was whether values for those tests that were below the diagnostic threshold would still be informative about chronic inflammation. But what are the sort of inflammatory markers outside of the specific autoimmune disorders that you would say are essential to measure? So we've got IL-6, that's one of them. Did we talk about C-reactive protein already?
We did.
Yeah.
Okay. So other than those two, IL-6 is a cytokine. Other than those two, anything that...
I mean, there's sedimentation rate. I don't love that one, though.
Yeah, we talked about that
It tends to be really reactive for things like vasculitis, but for smaller, like people who have active autoimmune disease, I'm not seeing it that high all the time. So I don't love it for just generalized inflammation.
I mean, inflammation is obviously super important, but it's a very broad term. And I think, again, the take home here, there's not one marker that's necessarily definitive, but it's a combination of things that come together can point you in the direction of, okay, there's an inflammatory condition here. It may or may not be a defined autoimmune disorder. Okay, and then we've got toxicity and exposure, and I think the two that we always measure are lead and mercury.
Correct.
Any comments there other than bad?
Bad. Yes. We have seen a lot of people who have mercury levels very close to 20 because they love poke bowls and sushi. It's very popular here in the Northwest. So,
and what is is 20 the range before it's considered out of range?
Yeah, so it goes up to, I think, 14.6, maybe it's 14.9, but you don't start really seeing symptoms of mercury toxicity until you hit 20, and that's when you're going to have enough mercury depositing, usually in the central nervous system. So that's headaches, paresthesias, tingling, a lot of those symptoms.
But of course, that's going to be individual. Some people might start symptoms at 14. Some people might not feel anything till 25. Yeah, it's interesting. I just recently was having lunch with a gentleman who told me that he recently got his mercury levels measured. He didn't tell me what they were, but he actually got a phone call from the State Department of Health.
Oh, wow. They were high then.
It wasn't Washington State. It was a different state. But he was very high.
What did he do?
He hasn't done anything other than he's cut. So he was eating, it sounds like he was eating fish, salmon probably, or tuna probably, multiple times a week, and the poke bowls every day for lunch. So actually, this, in conversation, we'll come back to therapeutic plasma exchange. I'm really not trying to push therapeutic plasma exchange, but it did occur to me, because that's one of the reasons why I tried it, was this idea that you can dilute out toxins, right? Heavy metals, plastics. And so that's what I recommended to him, and I actually put him in touch with a clinic that does therapeutic plasma exchange near where he's at. So hopefully he'll do it, and he can report back. But outside of that, I mean, there's not a lot you can. I mean, I guess if you have severe mercury poison, you can do like chelation therapy or something like that. But if it's sort of moderate, I'm guessing your recommendation is just cut back. Food, right?
Yep, and monitor it.
Yeah. But I mean, it is interesting. I think more and more we're seeing environmental exposures, and I think for a while, we had other toxins in our blood tests, and we just weren't seeing any positives. And so it was like, maybe we don't really need to do this for everyone. Okay. So I think that's it. Oh, and then we do salivary cortisol. Do we do that for everyone now?
No. That is just select people.
And that's a estimate of, I mean, if there's some reason to believe that they are have a particular stress profile, we're going to look at salivary cortisol 4 times a day to make sure that...
Yeah, we're just going to monitor to make sure they're having the normal peaks and valleys that they're supposed to have.
And so what would be the kind of person where you think that's called for?
So that's a little bit more into the functional medicine, but in patients who have, chronic adrenal fatigue, that's something that you would look at and making sure that their cortisol patterns are normal.
Do you use that test?
In certain people, if it's necessary. I mean, some people would just be high and all day, and you got to address that.
Right. And that's a chronic stress situation,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So we'll come back to the hormones. There are some other tests that we have done, still do. Gallery.
Gallery is our blood-based cancer screening. I find it very useful. We haven't yet had a positive here, so I don't know if I find some wood, knock on it. But I think the thing that people should be aware of when you're doing the Gallery test is that if you get a positive result, that does not mean you have cancer.
Right. In fact, it's like a 50-50 at that point.
I actually think it's less.
40-60.
I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's far less. I want to say maybe even 20 or 30%. And so the nice thing when they do the Gallery test is that they can also, based on the pattern of the DNA that they're seeing, very accurately predict where the cancer would be. And so you don't have to go on a great big fishing expedition. You can really do targeted diagnostics.
Right.
Yeah. And it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. It's really, its sweet spot is, at catching rapidly growing ones. This is why I like it. I mean, if we find pancreatic cancer in the traditional sense, usually it's too late.
Right.
You've got 6 months to a year, that kind of thing. My very first one I ever did was positive. Everybody is shocked about that.
Was it a true positive?
No, it was a neuroendocrine tumor. And then I worked with the oncologist. We scanned, we repeated the test in about 3 months. Luckily, it was negative.
Yeah.
I was really...
I mean, I think this is the criticism of not just Gallery, but whole body MRI, a lot of these diagnostics that you have a high false positive rate. The reason for that is because you want to be sensitive enough to detect the real things.
Right.
But I think, whether it's 50% or 20%, the idea that a majority of the time it's not going to be a true positive is problematic, right? And I think it creates a lot of anxiety for people. And
it's still useful.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm not, we offer it, right? It's part of our program. I'm all for it. But I think the education piece going in is super important so that people realize if they do get a positive back, there's a good chance that you don't really have cancer. And if you do, that's the whole reason why we did the test. Because then you wouldn't know if you hadn't done the test.
Catch it early,
right?
you can do something about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All the rest have been negative since that guy.
But if you have a positive Gallery and you have a negative workup, they will give you another free Gallery to do. I think it's 6 months later, so that you can test and follow and see if it's persistently positive. Then you should probably be ongoingly looking for something.
Interesting. Yeah, I've sort of wondered why it isn't the case that before you do the full workup, you don't just take another Gallery test. I mean, I'm not asking you guys that. I just sort of wondered why they don't recommend that. Because, if it's a true false positive and not caused by the fact that, I just happen to have a high circulating load of epigenetic marks in my circulating DNA that look like a particular cancer, it shouldn't show up the next time around, right? The likelihood you're going to get a false positive 2 times in a row if they're completely independent is the square of the likelihood. Sorry, I'm going down the math path, but it's low, right? Mm-hmm. So it seems like you might just test again, and if it comes out negative, you're like, okay, it was probably a false positive. And then you test again, and then you know for sure. All right. I'm just going to lump these together and not name names.
I knew this is where you were going.
We're no longer
on the list.
We are no longer routinely doing them at OptiScan.
That's right. We have pulled the plug on biological age tests because the direct-to-consumer tests are quite variable and non-actionable.
I will say that one of those in question does correlate with the patient's evaluation otherwise. Everything that I...
Correlate directionally, meaning you mean if somebody's biological age comes back higher than their chronological age, that they're generally unhealthy, or the opposite of that.
Well, that's true, but then the epigenetic markers in particular that have to deal with certain things, whether it's inflammation or lack of sleep or whatever, it matches what I already know. And so it gives the patient more data to kind of...
So let me push back on that a little bit. And the reason I say this is because I've witnessed this in another doctor who shall remain unnamed. It's not Nicki. So this particular direct-to-consumer product gives you about 30 different things back, right? That they're different epigenetic marks are associated with, including now organ and tissue function and things like that. Right. And there's a multiple testing problem here where you're going to perceive the 2 or 3 that line up with what you think you already know as validating all 30 of them. And so the reality is it may or may not actually be a true correlation. But when you give somebody 30 pieces of information and 4 or 5 of them, you're like, oh yeah, that really fits. You're going to ignore the other 26 that don't make any sense. So I'm not sure that that's even a real thing. what's the right way to say this? I feel like MDs may be more susceptible than PhDs to that kind of thing. I'm going to get myself in trouble.
I've never seen
That's
you
the
be
thought
so
that
careful
goes through
with
my
words.
brain. So anyways, I do think, I mean, it's sort of the magic of the way these things are marketed, right? Because they can make you believe that they work. And then when you actually sit down and do a real experiment, you're like, oh my God, it's all noise. So I don't know if it's working or not. But I think that's the problem. We don't know. And so let's stick with things we do know work and not deal with that other stuff. Anyways, boy, I probably just lit a fire, didn't I? Okay, so the other piece, right? So we talked about epigenetics in the context of the biological age test. Yeah. We're saying there are other things you can measure and that companies market that are also quote unquote biological age. We don't need to go into that. But then there's also the genetic piece. So whole genome sequencing, SNP typing to get genetic information on patients. Maybe talk a little bit about how you guys think about that, use that, and weight genetic predispositions in the context of other biomarkers that you can measure.
I mean, so when we're talking about that, I think it depends on what you're looking at. So for like an ApoE4, I take that very seriously. And I think that's, along with fasting insulin, one thing that not almost everyone should know is our ApoE4 status. But when you talk about the other genetics where you're predisposed for diabetes and other things, we do the single nucleotide polymorphisms at OptiSpan, and they take into account, tens of thousands of genes. Not all of them are going to be turned on. And so for me, how I use it is when I talk to the patient, it's more of you are predisposed to this. Let's try to work on those lifestyle things more so than changing my medical management.
And in particular, I think you're talking about the polygenic risk scores. We have multiple genes that then they'll give you a risk score for diabetes or cardiovascular disease or flatulence in my case, yes.
His was high.
Believe me, they actually have a polygenic risk score for flatulence.
That's right.
We do not typically report that to our clients or even pay any attention to it because it's absolutely wrong. Anyway.
So anyways, when it comes to the genetics, I think it really depends on what we're talking about gene-wise and whether or not that would change my medical management or whether or not it's just going to change how I speak to the patient about what they should be doing.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that is it's been quite frustrating that there is not, as far as we've been able to find, a good genetic program that can give you both the either whole genome sequencing or SNP typing and a useful report for the kind of medicine that we do here, right? Either it's geared towards specific genetic diseases, right, which are usually pretty rare, or they just give you a data dump with 18,000 variants and, 150 or 200 polygenic risk scores. That's just not useful for people who are actually trying to do, health span medicine. So we're trying to create something like that. Hopefully someone else will build that. Because I think there's a need. There's a need out there right now for something that physicians who want to do science-based, evidence-based, quality, proactive healthcare, that there isn't a tool that works really well in the genetic space. I don't know, maybe if you have a different feel, but it's been very frustrating.
I just think it's really useful, like what you said. People come to this space, they don't know where to start. It's very complex. There's so many different moving parts. And getting a polygenic risk score can say, okay, this is your biggest problem, A, B, C, and we need to work on A. Let's do everything we can to hit that.
Particularly if it lines up with biomarkers, yeah.
Exactly.
And I do wonder if there's also maybe a psychological component that can be valuable, which is if somebody's like, I've been really trying hard. I've been trying to clean up my diet. I can't get my lipids down. And you can be like, you have a genetic risk factor. So you're predisposed to that. That can explain why you struggle with this. And this is really something we have to pay attention to because you're at higher risk. And is it fair? No, but those are the cards you've been dealt.
Right.
Okay, so hopefully that will get better. And I do think, obviously, as there's more and more genetic information accumulating, that's one of the real powerful features of the genetic data set is that it's only going to grow in information. It means it's also going to grow in complexity. So we need good tools that can give us the information we want and not all the other stuff that's not useful. Okay, So let's come back to hormones, and this we'll finish up with this. So, I mean, obviously, hormones are important. Here's where, I think clearly you need to differentiate between women and men. So, it just happens we have one of each here, so we can kind of split it up. So let's start with Kevin, and we'll go to Nicki. So, how do you think about hormonal health for men in your practice?
That's a broad question. For men, obviously, the biggest player is testosterone. Of course, you look at estrogen, you look at all these things, right? Sex hormone, binding globulin, free testosterone, albumin, the whole picture. So it's not just what's my testosterone level, So
it's more complicated than just testosterone.
Complicated than
and
that.
Just for for people who want to really deep dive in this, Kevin and I just recorded an episode where we talk about this in some detail. But go ahead.
So you got to manage that. If it's low, you got to figure out why it's low and kind of fix that problem or manage that. And it's not just about, giving them testosterone. It's like figuring out why is it so low. And that can be lack of sleep, alcohol use, stress, other issues, and then just managing that. And then knowing that getting that level up, why is that important? Lowers all-cause mortality. Your health span, your health span, lifespan, all just enriched per se. So, the guys are fairly easy compared to our counterparts.
All right. That's a good segue to female hormones. And I know you have recently been doing a lot of research into menopause. Mm-hmm. So maybe tell us kind of what's your philosophy on how we approach this?
I mean, so it depends on where you are in your whole span. So the majority of the women that we get will be perimenopausal or above, just based on our patient population. The hormone testing is less ideal for women in perimenopause because your numbers can kind of go up and down all the time. And so you can get, your body's pushing out tons of estrogen to try to make you ovulate an egg. And if it doesn't, implant, then your progesterone drops quickly, and it drops so quickly, sometimes your estrogen shoots up again, and you can get all these. That's where the symptoms of perimenopause come, is all these symptoms because you're not in this normal regular cycle. And so I think it's really important that women are aware of why this is happening, why they're having sudden onset of anxiety, or why they're suddenly gaining weight, or all these other symptoms, and that there's something that we can do about it.
Yeah.
In the vast majority of patients, my opinion is that hormone therapy is going to offer them a lot more benefit than not doing it. I know the Women's Health Initiative scared a lot of people. That data is pretty flawed. I don't want to put it down because it's an amazing study with how many people that they were able to enroll and monitor, but the data is flawed. But even if you went
or the interpretation was certainly flawed.
But even if you went with their interpretation, if you look at, something like 50% of women between 50 and 80 are going to suffer from a fracture, putting those women on hormone therapy and preventing that versus a teeny tiny increase in breast cancer, I still think that the benefits are going to outweigh the risks. And what Women's Health Initiative and subsequent studies showed us is the earlier that you start hormone therapy, the better your outcomes. And so we follow hormones, and it does help guide us in terms of where someone is. If we're seeing changes with the estrogen and the progesterone that don't look like a normal cycle, that's maybe you're having anovulatory cycles, maybe you're in perimenopause. If we start seeing the FSH and LH rise, maybe you're getting much closer to menopause. So we do follow the hormones in our perimenopause population. They're less important. And then when someone does go through menopause, we do want to follow them because we want to make sure, ideally, we're giving them the lowest possible dose of estrogen, but there is a certain dose that you need for bone protection.
I was going to say, why the lowest possible dose? What's the thought process there?
The lowest possible dose is based on all the things that I've read from older studies, because there is a risk that you could, the studies are done based on oral estrogen, most of them. And so if you are on higher oral estrogen, you have to take in really high doses. It gets metabolized in the liver, and it increases your risk of clots, whether that's stroke, whether it's heart attack, whether that's a deep vein thrombosis. And so the recommendations are based off of old studies. Now most people are using transdermal that has far less risk. I still think, and as I said it, medicine still tends to think the lowest possible dose is the best. But I think that it is important to get women to a certain level for bone health. So we usually think of an estradiol around 60 for that, where we want women to have at least that much estradiol if we're going to protect their bones. And then, if we need to go above for symptoms, we'll go above for symptoms.
And so in the perimenopausal women who are on hormone therapy, if the blood tests themselves are less useful because there's a lot of variation, is it really just dosing to symptoms then at that point primarily? And so I imagine that there's, some level of frustration that goes along with that because you probably have to tweak and, move stuff around. But it's kind of the best you can do in that
the best you can do. And that even happens in our postmenopausal patients because a lot of women will need different amounts of progesterone to keep their uterine lining where we want it to be. A lot of women have breakthrough bleeding, especially in the first year. And so it does take a lot of back and forth and a lot of dose adjustments. And so patients should be aware if they're starting hormone therapy, it's not like they're going to get a regimen and go off on their way.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I think obviously I'm a man, so I don't have the woman's perspective, but I mean, it's my impression, right, that there's also just a lack of information out there. Like, I think a lot of women going into perimenopause don't know a lot of this stuff. And so there's a lot of anxiety around, should I do hormone therapy or not? And even then that, why it is that you're measuring these things and adjusting the values of these different hormones and the symptoms that are associated with it. It's just, I feel like it's still not nearly as widely talked about or practiced out there as it needs to be.
I mean, there's a large social media campaign going on with them. They call themselves the Menopause. I follow them. They're wonderful women. They're, endocrinologists and OB-GYNs and urogynecologists, and they're out there really promoting this. They're going to med schools and they're teaching doctors. I don't know about you, but I started med school after the Women's Health Initiative. And so what we were taught was hormones will give you breast cancer. We don't offer it. And that is all the education we got on menopause therapy. Wow. And so there's a whole generation of doctors that are my age that if you got interested in this, you have to teach yourself entirely on how to do it.
Right.
And so I think that's also where the problem is even if women know I'm in perimenopause, I go to my doctor and I ask, and they said, no, we don't do that.
Yeah.
Right.
And so people are getting pushed away from their doctors, which I think is really tough.
Yeah.
And estrogen, there's some correlation around cognitive decline and lack of estrogen. So we're setting women up whenever we don't do that for, like you said, osteopenia, osteoporosis, fractures, and cognitive,
and cardiovascular disease.
There's
a bunch of problems that go along. There are a bunch of age-related processes that seem to be accelerated by menopause.
Yes.
And that's largely driven by the changes in hormones that happen during menopause.
So we really do a disservice if we withhold this stuff from women,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's great that there is this growing recognition and visibility and data collection, right? I mean, this is an area where, you started out by saying, well, men are easier than women. And I mean, that's true in some sense. But I feel like, again, maybe I'm wrong. I feel like this is one of the rare places, though, where it's actually, I think, better understood in women what happens, the hormonal changes that happen during aging, in part because it happens to every woman and it's more or less, going to happen in a certain stage of life, whereas men are much more variable. But I feel like there's not as much information or understanding on what is the quote unquote, normal isn't the right word, but population average effects of hormonal changes in men and what the risks and benefits of treating that are. Now it feels like the pendulum has shifted where you can just go online and a doc will just give you testosterone, right?
Sure.
Not even pay attention how much they're giving you, which is not a great situation either, right? So I sort of feel like in both men and women, there needs to be a more rigorous and scientific approach and thoughtful approach to what gives the best balance for overall quality of life and health. Super important. And I think this is a place where certainly among the clients that we have at OptiSpan, the demographic of that group, is right of primary importance for them. So we spent a lot of time thinking about it. Okay. What do you find most annoying about the longevity community? It doesn't have to be most. What's one thing that annoys you about the longevity?
It doesn't annoy me, but it makes it tough, is that patients come to us and they think we're going to have a magic bullet for them.
Yeah.
There's no really big secret right now. It's what you do. It's what you eat, what you're moving, how you're sleeping, your connection to others. Yes, we're going to follow your biomarkers. Yes, there are some medications that might be helpful. We've talked a lot about SGLT2 inhibitors recently. You talk a lot about rapamycin. We talk about different supplements, but there's no single magic bullet. You're not going to come to us and we're going to do your genetics and say, if you take metformin, you're going to live to 120. And I think people expect that degree of certainty over how we can manage them.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think, part of that obviously is fed by the way the media presents the longevity community. What about you, Kevin?
Just some of I wasn't prepared for this question. There's so many things going on in my head.
Just say it.
Some of the outliers that give the longevity space a bad name. So whenever our traditional counterparts see it, it's like, oh, you've gone off. They don't even understand what you're doing. It's so weird. And their experience with it is some bizarre, thing they're seeing. And, whenever you go to, like, say, the age conference or people doing real science, this is it's a real area of, it's the future of medicine.
Yeah. And let me just see if I can rephrase it. It seems like one of the things that is frustrating is that the two of you sometimes might get painted with a brush that is caused by the fringe folks who are doing wacky stuff and going to secret islands and,
And I think that's entertaining, and there has to be those. And those people on the fringe just they bring attention to the space.
Yeah.
But what I want is for it to be respected, and I believe there's a lot of people doing real respectful work in this space.
I would agree. Okay, so that's on the sort of negative side. On the positive side, what's one thing that's exciting?
Yes, it's your turn. Would you like to go?
I went first last time.
He needs to think about it.
No, the future of it, it's always changing. There's new. It's the information is coming out so rapidly. So what's going on now in 5 years, we're going to be well far ahead. So it's an exciting thing to be a part of.
And I think related to that, we haven't talked about, AI yet, but the way, obviously we think a lot here at OptiSpan about how we can incorporate AI tools into our programs. And I think that's it's easy to say it's going to be a game changer, but I think it really is going to have a huge impact, particularly in this sort of, health span medicine sphere, both for providers and for individuals.
And then one of the things that I think is exciting is actually, I love to do puzzles. And so a lot of the things that people bring to me, it's fun to research. Like there's a lot that I get to learn.
Yeah.
Whereas, I did 10 years of hospital medicine, and I'm not saying I know everything about hospital medicine, but there's only so many different drug variations we do for community-acquired pneumonia, right? Like it's a lot more protocolized. And here people are coming in saying, hey, I heard about using GLP-1 agonists for this. What do you think about me? And you get to really think outside the box and whether or not this would be a good drug for them, or is there a better option for their goal? And I think that's really fun.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, that's a perfect way to finish it. Thank you both. I've had a lot of fun. Hopefully you guys did too. And thank you, as always, for watching the OptiSpan podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, or you can always go to the website and submit your questions there. We try to gather them up and periodically have an AMA where we take the best questions that we get submitted. And hope to see you next time on the podcast.
That's it for today's episode of The Daily Apple. Thanks for listening. If this helped clarify some of the noise around labs and longevity, we'd love if you'd share it with someone who's thinking about their health more seriously, or send it to your doctor and start the conversation. And if you're ready to go deeper, if you're looking for a medical partner who doesn't just order tests, but helps you build a long-term plan based on them, you can learn more about how we work at primehealthassociates.com. You'll also find a direct link to our DEXA scan intake page in the show notes if you're local and looking to get started. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. You can follow us on Apple and Spotify, and please review us to let us know what you think.